Would you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and may the meditations of our hearts together be acceptable in your sight. For you, Lord, are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, I don't really know how long hand sanitizer has been around, but the first time that I became aware of it, or really the first time it became a big part of my life, was back in 2007 when I was part of a group from the United States who traveled to Kampala, Uganda, for a conference for emerging Christian leaders, which was led by an African organization that's called Amahoro Africa. The trip was an amazing experience, in large part because we didn't really travel as tourists. We were there to participate in an event that was led by African leaders, and it was primarily for African leaders. So, like the other Americans that I traveled with, I was really excited to fully participate in all of the conference activities, meals, field trips, and I was really also paranoid about picking up an intestinal parasite. All of us carried around bottles of hand sanitizer, but we tried to be very discreet about using it because we both wanted to be safe, but we didn't want to communicate to all of the Africans who were participating in the same program that we thought that they were unclean or in some ways foolish not to also be using hand sanitizer. Well, after a week and a half in Uganda for the conference, we broke into groups, and my group took a field trip to Rwanda. We visited various ministries that were led by people who were part of the conference, but the main event of this trip to Kigali, Rwanda, was Sunday morning worship led by Pastor Jane. Now, Pastor Jane was one of the few women at the conference who led their own congregations. And she was an amazing woman. She was beautiful and energetic and tall and just had this big voice and commanding presence. And she had an outreach ministry in Kigali, which was apparently in the red light district. And we all went there for Sunday morning worship. Now, Jane was certainly not one of Rwanda's famous preachers or a nationally recognized leader. And so she was very excited to have this group of international visitors there in her congregation this morning. Her worship service was basically held underneath this big, huge tent, the kind that you would like rent for an outdoor event. It was permanently set up in sort of a field back behind some buildings. And it was filled with a couple hundred plastic lawn chairs. And that was the church. That and a gigantic speaker system. The worship was enthusiastic, to say the least. And by the time it came for Jane to preach, the spirit was really moving in that tent. And Jane started her sermon by introducing our group, which included about 6 of us, Americans. We were enjoying being anonymous, but she had us stand up at that point for the whole group to see. And then she said, "Well, you know, Americans," she said to the group, "before they come to our country, they need to get vaccinations. And while they're here, they carry around their little bottles of hand sanitizer." At this point, we felt very embarrassed, but these comments got a big response from the congregation, who was clearly familiar with the ways of American tourists. But Jane didn't stop there. She said, these Americans are different. These Americans come here because they know we have experienced God in a way that is too powerful to ignore. These Americans come here because they want to catch something from us. These Americans, she declared, they want to get infected. And with these words, the crowd went absolutely wild. And I felt really moved too. All of us did. And I found myself praying something in that moment along the lines of, yes, God, I want to catch what they have. I've been thinking about that experience in Kigali a lot over the past few weeks for obvious reasons. For one, hand sanitizer has once again become a very important part of my life. But I've also been thinking about how easily we spread things among each other. Viruses, obviously. Travel from person to person in chains that epidemiologists and public health professionals have been working overtime these days to document. You can see the graphs and the charts and the maps online, and they're pretty captivating to watch. But I've also seen over the past few weeks how anxiety can spread from person to person, how misinformation can spread, how fear can spread, even panic. I didn't even need toilet paper at the start of this whole period of social distancing. But when I heard those news reports about a toilet paper shortage, I found myself wanting to go out and buy, 100 rolls of toilet paper just in case. And it made me feel anxious to go to the grocery store and see the shelf where the toilet paper had been, to see that it was empty. Have you noticed how contagious those kinds of feelings can be? Have you caught them from someone? Have you spread them? But friends, viruses and anxiety, well, those aren't the only things that spread. That's not all that we catch from each other. Easter, as it turns out, is also contagious. Did the story of Easter sound any different to you when you read it this year? Did you notice anything you might have overlooked in previous years? Here's what I noticed. Here's what stood out for me. The first Easter celebration was really small. According to the Gospel of Matthew, there's just Mary Magdalene, another Mary, and an angel. And the angel, while appearing like lightning and very dramatic in appearance, the angel's affect is really pretty low key. When Mary encounter him, the gospel says he's just sitting there on a stone, the stone that had been used to seal the tomb. There's no trumpet, no harp, no heavenly chorus. The angel sees the women and gets straight to the point. I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified, the angel tells the women. He's not here, for he has been raised as he said. And he invites the women to go to the tomb and see for themselves. But the angel isn't done. He's not done there. He hasn't finished when he announces Jesus' resurrection. The gospel tells us that he has a message to deliver to the women. Go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. Later, the women encounter Jesus on the road, and he tells them the exact same thing. He gives them the exact same charge. Here's a message. Go and deliver it. So even though Easter starts really small in the Gospel of Matthew, it was never supposed to stay small. From the start, the story of Jesus' resurrection was something Jesus' disciples were supposed to spread from person to person to person until the whole world knows this amazing news about the power of God's love, God's promise, which is even more powerful than death. Have you ever wondered why God chose to announce Jesus' resurrection to such a small crowd? Surely it would have been more persuasive for everyone if God had resurrected Jesus in front of a crowd of thousands, in front of millions. The resurrected Christ, for example, could have walked through the streets of Jerusalem, could have stood on the steps of the temple and preached, gone and knocked on Pilate's door, put him and his entire empire in his place. But that's not how God works, apparently. God did the resurrecting and then gave Jesus' disciples, gave us the job of spreading the good news to the rest of the world. Friends, so often we think of ourselves as distinct and isolated individuals. We give ourselves permission to just do our own thing as long as we don't hurt anybody else. We hear about national debates, global problems, and we feel so removed from all of it. What do our individual words, what do our particular actions matter? Well, the coronavirus has given us clear evidence that this way of thinking is totally wrong. Our individual lives are linked to the lives of so many other people near to us and far away, people we know and people who are unknown to us are affected by what we do. Small events can become massive events in a short period of time because of these connections. The virus has shown us that change builds exponentially because we're so connected. Now, that's the lesson of global pandemics, but it is actually the lesson of Easter as well. The resurrection of Jesus was something that only a handful of people experienced firsthand. But Jesus doesn't just appear to those few people to console them in their grief, to reassure them that everything would be all right. He's not there just for them. He appeared to them to give them a commission, a charge. Go and tell. Which brings me back to the question, what are you spreading? Just because we're socially distancing doesn't mean that we're not connected to each other. In fact, we may be more aware of our connections to each other than ever when we're spending all day in the house with our immediate family members and bumping into each other morning, noon, and night. We may be aware of these connections even more when we have to make such an effort to call friends on the phone when we're holding our Zoom happy hours and Zoom dinner parties and Zoom birthday parties. And of course, when we connect with each other, of course we share our worries. Of course, we share our anxieties. We all need somebody to lean on, as the song says. And one of the benefits of living in community is that we help each other carry the hard parts of life. But Jesus' commission, his Easter charge, doesn't just apply to preachers or professional evangelists. It applies to every single one of us. We have something more to share than just our anxieties. As people of faith, as people who have received the good news of the resurrection, we've been charged to share that good news with the whole world. What would it look like to bring that promise into your relationships with your family, with your friends, into your Zoom meetings and your socially distant interactions with your neighbors? How might you, with your words and with your actions, let the people you're connected to know that God's love cannot be defeated even by the worst that this world has to offer? How can you let them know that as a Christian, you have hope? We have an incredible gift, friends. We have an amazing promise. Jesus Christ is risen. The grave is not all this world has to offer. Death is never the end. And we know this. We declare this because somebody told somebody. Who are you going to tell? Who are you going to show? Friends, go out and be contagious. Thanks be to God. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed.